So you guys let me know when you can see my screen, okay?
Got it.
All right. So John will start talking about Osirian, Osiris temples and the Osirian temple. There is a ton of information there. He jumps a lot to get to what he's talking about. So when he start talking about the pentagon that comes from the dodecahedron, and that's actually two dodecahedrons. So there is like multiple systems before we get to that point. And for you guys that know Matthias and follow Matthias, the two dodecahedrons together, that's Mahasaham. So there is a long journey before we get to that. And Jumbo will get to that point at some point again, going deeper into those topics. But I realized it would be better, to step back and uh, go through the forms or the shapes, some of the most basics, and do the movements so we can start understanding how we go from one point to the other. And I'll try to make that movement going through the seed of life, the flower life, and then the platonic solids. And if time allows us, I'll try to connect that with the dimensions because he also talks about the dimensions. Okay, so I have a circle here. Let me get out of those. So, and if we do a dot in a circle, for many cultures, that was the God symbol. So that's the all and the whole and the all. We have the singularity and we have the whole, right? Now let's imagine the singularity is the consciousness, is the great spirit, right? So before it, there is nothing. Nothing comes before the great spirit. But so he can experience him slash herself, he needs to create a container, right? So the first circle symbolizes the container. And then this will also make a relationship with the Kybalion, and the universe is mental, right? So it's like God is dreaming or thinking, and that thought creates a whole universe and a whole amount of information, but the movement's not ready yet, right? So if we let me do the singularity again. So as he find his limit, he has no other option than expand himself again, so he can keep the movement, and he can keeps unfolding what he can become. And all of this born from the question, what can I become? So through the question, he start making the movements. So the second movement, he's going to go out of himself, out of the container, to the next boundary. So you go from one center to the other center. And now you have two spheres. The second sphere, the center of the second sphere will land in the border of the first one. And then doing this movement, we have the first sacred shape here, which is the Vesica Pisces. This symbol itself has a lot of information contained into it. So if you divide the horizontal length by the vertical length, you have pi, or sorry, phi, phi, read pi, or you read phi, one of the two. You guys help me with the English, one of the two, but it's phi, not pi. And this will also contain information about light itself, just through the way it is drawn. You will find the square root of 2, 3, and 5 in this shape. All of those numbers, they are infinite numbers. So just doing one movement, we are getting a lot of information. And then, oh yeah, let me pause again. So another thing that is important as we try to understand or we try to draw sacred geometry is understanding the concepts of male and female and the principles of polarity. We talked about that a little bit in the last week, but um, to convert the concept to a drawing, we can think that the female energy is it'll come in curves because that's the creative form, that's the creative and intuitive force. The male energy will come in straight lines, and this we are gonna use a little bit of this here, but in other shapes we're gonna use a ton of that, and we will need to combine both male and female energies to see the big picture. Okay, so the creator went from the first container to the second one, and he has no other option than expand itself again so he can keep expanding its limit. And now we have the Trinity. If we draw a line from each center of the triangle or each center of the circles, we're going to have a triangle. So between duality, we have the center. So between the husband and the wife, you're going to find the child. Between black and gray, you find, or between black and white, you find gray. Between cold and war and hot, you find warm. So here we have the sacred trinity. Everything will find itself in the universe, or the creation will manifest itself in three. We can, another good example of that is the atom. So we have protons, neutrons, but also neutrons. The only atom that doesn't have a neutron is the hydrogen because it's like the first movement. So we go back to the Visca Pisces with two spheres, and that's hydrogen. As it keeps moving, now you're gonna find the three elements. And then we will keep doing this until we get this shape. And in the Bible, Jumbo will dive into this in one chapter, so I don't want to get too deep because we'll have the time to talk about it. But he will relate this symbol with the Bible and the 6 days of Genesis. So in the beginning there was six. I was talking about the six circles here, and I'll save that discussion for later on because he reserved a chapter just for that. But this is one of the most sacred symbols found in many different cultures, and Jumbalu mentioned that in his book. And we can keep doing the same movement, right? We can keep connecting circles between the edges, and then what we're gonna find is this. The flower of life. And actually, when he talks about the symbols, he actually was talking about the flower of life, not the seed of life. But the seed of life is contained in the flower of life. And this is the symbol drawn in the Osirian temple, in Indian temples, in some temples in Europe. Jumvolu talks about a couple of examples, and he talks about his story with the picture, how his friend found that. Now, this symbol, it's not the end yet, but that's what we found in multiple temples. So there is a hidden knowledge here, and was hidden for a purpose. Back in those days, I mean, people would get killed all the time because of practicing, because knowing too much, because like spreading the knowledge. So here we have, we can call it a zona pellucida. In those temples, this circle here is actually just folding the rest of the movements. You will find only 19 circles here. So the flower of life will have other symbols contained within, but you need to keep making the movements. So if we delete this symbol and keep adding circles to them, I will skip this movement. But this, as you keep adding circles, you're gonna find this here. And this is the fruit of life. Now, this is one of the most sacred symbols, and that was hidden in those cultures. Why it was so sacred? Because out of the fruit, it will born all of the Platonic shapes. So we have the whole cycle here. The seed, the flower becomes the fruit, and then from the fruit, it can manifest itself in different forms. So before I start drawing the Platonic shapes here, what are the Platonic shapes? So a Platonic shape, as described by the Greeks, is a shape that you can draw or put inside of a sphere, and all of the edges, all of the vertices will touch the sphere. All of the faces will have the same format. All of the lines will have the same size, and all of the angles between the vertices or the lines will have the same angle. So we have only five geometric patterns does that can fulfill all of those requirements. We have the tetrahedron, we have the cube, we have the octahedron, we have the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. Okay, so let's start talking about them. And now we can unfold the five elements and understand their symbols. And then the most sacred of those lines is when we combine all of the male energy with the female energy, and then we have what Pablo has on his back, which is the perfect balance between male and female, and that's the Metatron cube. So let's talk about the tetrahedron. That's the most simple shape. What is the dodecahedron? So dodecahedron, as understood in the Pythagoras school, is the fire. So the fire will mean the flame, the energy that burns inside of us, that sacred flame that moves us, that's the desire, the energy. And here I want to bring Matthias Stefano perspective as well, because I really like how he puts the four uh, path paths. So you have three triangle shapes and sorry, four triangle shapes, and each face means one phase or aspect of a whole. So from his perspective, God will always manifest in four phases, which is the expression, experimentation, integration, and transcendence. So this is a fractal, and by fractal, it means that it repeats itself. So What we can see in the whole universe, we'll find also in our bodies and in the atoms and also in our lives. Hey, go ahead, Pablo.
So sorry, just to, if you could repeat really quick, it was expression, experimentation, integration, and what was the last one?
Transcendence.
Transcendence. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, feel free to pause me. That's the idea, Pablo. I'm talking too much today.
No, but it's so much information, and that chapter, you know, it's so much information, and he's covering so many things that, yeah, it's really great that you're breaking this down for us like this, because um some of the bigger points, you know, there's so many things that it's nice to kind of have this bird's eye view that you're sharing with us, to have a, to be able to connect everything that he was talking about. So thank you.
I kept thinking of how to connect that because yeah, he chose just too much on, on that chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have this is man, this is so important, those four phases here. And it's funny, the last ceremony with Sanso, I had the expression and I couldn't remember what was the second step. So, damn it, I know I need to integrate and transcend, but what I'm missing, and the whole teaching was about that, to experiment, you know. The Mama Aya was teaching me, you know, to experiment what I was expressing or what I had expressed before, you know. It was in the second day, and you know, at some point it was everything so calm. People was, you know, in their processes, but it was silent. And then I couldn't remember what is the second movement, and then you know only in the very end it was like it just flashed in my mind. Well, now that you experienced what you helped created, you can integrate and transcend. You cannot integrate and transcend what you haven't experienced before, you know. So it's a movement. We express, and as we express we need to go through that process, whatever we express. So we better be careful what we create in this work, because we're gonna need to deal with that. We are the creators, so you know, any thoughts, any feelings, any actions that will generate these four movements. And the more shit we create, the more shit we need to deal with. So better, you know, not create too much shit, so we don't need to handle all of that later on, because that's cause and effect again, rebellion. So if we create that, at some point we don't need to integrate that and transcend it. Okay, so this is fire. Inside of the fruit of life, we can also draw the cube. And then the cube will symbolize earth, stability. Um, the Greeks also thought that there are two shapes. There are the mother and father of all of the others, and they are the the cube and the sphere. So here we have another system itself, another element. So earth will also be manifestation, also will also be matter. If you get the cube and unfold it, you know, creating a two-dimensional shape, you'll see the cross. So you also have the cross inside of the cube.
And I also like observing, is even just drawing these for fun too. I also like observing one thing that he mentioned in the chapter, a little bit later when we're talking about the dimensions and the chromatic scale for sound. Sequences of numbers and patterns of numbers too, right? So, you know, so with the triangle, we end up with 4 faces, right? With this one too, as you said, as you split that open in that 2-dimensional plane and you can see that cross, well, you count that too, it's 6, right? So we go triangle, so we go from 3 to 4 phases, and then from this we go from 4 to 6. So it's also nice for me to kind of just notice that too. 4, 6, what will be the next one? And then counting that and noticing the pattern between the numbers as we go through each of these two.
Just remind me of the duals. The next one will be the icosahedron, and let me do that, and I will, yeah, remind me of something very nice here, Pablo, of this order. So the next one would be the dodecahedron. Oh, sorry, the octahedron. And in sacred geometry, we also have what is called the dual pairs. So the first one we draw was the tetrahedron, and there is only one shape that fits the tetrahedron inside of itself, and it's the tetrahedron itself. So we can just imagine if we look the tetrahedron from its side, we're gonna see a triangle, right? And if we get another tetrahedron inside of it, or the only other shape we can fit inside of the tetrahedron is another tetrahedron. So the tetrahedron it's its own dual pair. Now the second was the cube, the third one was the octahedron. The dual pair of the octahedron is the cube, and the cube is the dual pair of the octahedron. So what I mean by that is you can place a cube inside of the octahedron, and all of the vertices will touch all of the cube's vertices will touch all of the octahedron faces. So they are complementary. So Earth, and here the octahedron, at least from the Greek perspective, this is the air. So air and earth in their systems will be complementary. We have other people perspectives, like Matthias will see the octahedron as uh, prana or akash or ether, and the Greeks in the Platonic schools and Pythagorean schools, they will see the dodecahedron as the ether. And for me, that makes more sense, and I'll explain later why. So air, here we have air. Octahedron from Greek perspective is air, and air is the thought, the voice. So it's the manifestation through ideas. It's the mind. Next one, I'll draw the regular 4 first, and then I go through the dodecahedron. So now I have a icosahedron. So it's a shape with 20 faces. Does everyone can visualize what is a icosahedron? If not, raise your hand and I can open some images here on Google and try to, yeah, let's do it. Here. Go ahead. Let's see. So that's how a icosahedron looks like. So it has 20 triangular faces. I will go back real quick just to show the other ones. Cube is straightforward. Octahedron, that's how an octahedron looks like. Oh, and that's a good example of the dual pair. But actually the cube would need to be a little smaller, so it actually is contained by the octahedron. What is this? Here. That's great. All of the shapes. Tetrahedron, octahedron, cube, hexahedron, icosahedron, and dodecahedron. So icosahedron, in the Greek perspective, is the water. The water is intuition, feelings. It's the icosahedron. In Matthias' perspective, that would be air. And finally, we have the dodecahedron. I have read from many authors that in Greece, if you even speak that word dodecahedron, you would get killed if you speak that word out of the occult centers and the schools of mystery, because that was a hidden knowledge inside of that. To make the whole Merkaba meditation exercise, we do need that to visualize the dodecahedron at some point. And that's ether. That's the most difficult element to understand. That's the fifth element. So ether is like the essence of everything. It's the essence of the other four elements. It's the kind of the spirit inside of the four elements, what is bounding the universe together. Some people relate ether with time and space. Some people relate ether with the quantum vacuum because it's an infinite amount of energy contained in an infinitely small point. Like from any point in the universe, you can get an infinite amount of energy because as within, so below, or so, as above, so below, as within, so without. So all of the information of the universe is contained in every single particle. That's some people relate the ether. Some people relate that to prana, the life force that you keep breathing. And Jungwoo talks a lot about that. That after the fall of Atlantia, we forgot how to breathe. We stopped breathing prana through the pineal gland, and we just send the air and the prana straight to our lungs. And that helped us to forget everything. That helped us to forget our past lives, to forget our connection. So there's a lot of information there. And now let me try to draw this here. And then there will be a little magic. This is hard to draw because it's not all contained. And for me, that's why it makes sense. This one is, this symbol is related to prana and to ether. There's like a 4 hidden circles that needs to be drawn in order to draw the dodecahedron here. I will draw them just to help me, and then I'm gonna exclude them. So one side here.
You have to turn your 90 degrees off. Your right angle.
Direto?
Say that again, Elijah.
I was asking if that right angle was making it.
Oh, yeah. Probably got some of those vertices wrong because it doesn't look symmetrical. But you guys got the idea. I'll need to work on that myself. Or it's 6 extra triangles. Show one image. Trying to draw this guy here, and you guys can see that some of the vertices doesn't fit completely inside of the fruit of life, and the reason for that is because ether, it's not as tangible as the other elements. We cannot really see it, we cannot perceive it with our senses, so it's something that you need to feel. So that's the only element that will not be fully enclosed in the fruit of life. And for me, that's why it makes a lot of sense that the dodecahedron is the
Ether.
prana and the ether, and then the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, they are dual pairs, so you can fit one inside the other. So water and ether, you can contain them one inside the other. And if you, instead of contain them, you make them the same size and make the dodecahedron penetrate through the icosahedron penetrated the decahedron, you're going to create a different shape, a shape with 32 nodes. And this shape will relate to the crystic grid. You guys that went to Egypt, you know that symbol because Matthias used that to divide the nodes. So Drumble will also talk about the crystic grid and how that grid has specific spots on Earth that will amplify the energy, amplify the information received and sent. So received from other galaxies, received from other planets, and how we send them to. And he will also talk how that grid got destabilized and how people were working to make that grid to work again. And just a side note, me, Catchy, Elijah, and Merle, we did a work with Matthias in February of this year that was completely related to that, was to connect with one of those nodes and activate that energy of the crystic grid. So there are multiple people that have done work on the grid to stabilize the grid over the years. The two people that I studied the most, one is Matias Stefano, they're Argentina that guide this process through Egypt, and Dr. Todd Ovocautis. He's a great doctor. He invented a bunch of technology, and he used a different tool. He used the Lemurian that he also brought up to this life, and he remember how to sing some songs from Lemuria to connect with specific energies and to kind of calibrate and, as he described, to access the time capsules. So the way he would describe and also Crane would describe, it's in this crystic grid, there are some capsules that was inserted back in the days, like 1,000 years ago, back in the Lemurian time, back in the Atlantean time. And these capsules have a lot of information, and they were just waiting for the proper time for us to awaken that. And as within, so without, as above, so below. So that is also contained in our DNA. And it is time. It is time to unfold the time capsule, to unfold our infinite potential. It is time to go back to our DNA and activate and remember everything that we are. Okay, so I talked too much, and I'll pass the word around and see if you guys have other insights about this. But that was my intention, to kind of hit what Drumble was talking from different perspective, and also give you guys some context and some practical knowledge here. We drew some of the symbols together. Now, when he talks about the seed of life, you know what it's coming from. When he talks about the flower of life, you know where it's coming from. If he talks about the fruit of life, you know where is it coming from. We just didn't cover the Metatron cube, which is huge. There's a lot of information there. We also didn't cover the tree of life, because again, that's people have written books just about the tree of life. So we're gonna need a whole hour to talk about that one. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have, guys.
One thing for me that was really interesting about this chapter, as we connect the shapes and the expansion from the Platonic solids to just thinking of the shape and connection between curve and line, and then thinking of curve in terms of, what the chapter focuses on in terms of wavelength and waveform, as it then relates to movement and the rotation and expansion of galaxies. But one thing that really helped connect all of this for me was sound. And so, it's easy for me to always default to, the natural scale. Those are 7 notes, but it was really interesting to hear him focus more on the chromatic scale, because that is 12 notes, right? We can imagine, Drunvalo even talks in the book of the white and black keys. When you look at a piano or a keyboard and you literally go and count those, that's different than just the sounds of an octave in with the white keys. And so for me, it was interesting to hear him talk about that. But then one thing that the musical nerd in me here, as you can see behind me over here, one thing that really connected to me with all of this was the overtones. When you're playing the guitar, if you just hold the string, you get that one note in between those little lines, right? But if I bring my finger down and push on it and bend it, you get so many different sounds within that same note. And so it was really interesting to hear him talk about that, because that helped me visualize the expansive and contracting nature of even the meditation we were doing, because it's the same thing as that contracts. Meaning for me, when I think of contracting, if I'm tuning that guitar string until it gets tighter and tighter and tighter until it almost breaks, that's the contraction for me there. And the expansion, when you kind of like let it go and it gets really loose. In that contraction and expansion, then I can see, the additional 12 notes, the additional 12 dimensions, and within each of those 12, the expansion and contraction of those overtones. And so it's really interesting to just kind of sit with that thought and sit with that idea and the drawings you were doing, and just imagine that too, contracting and expanding, the microscopic nature of these things, and that was really cool for me to just kind of connect that, the geometric and mathematical way he was trying to talk about it, but for me, just really just connecting more with what I can hear in the sound of it. That was cool. That's what stood out to me a lot in there, visualizing the nature of that, or visualizing with my ears, I guess. I guess that's what visualizing with your ears is, what we call hearing, I guess.
Well, if I could ask you to just make it even more simple for me, because there was a moment where I felt like it all came together and I had some understanding, and then it was gone. And so I'm thinking about, like, so we have the temples and we have these geometric patterns, and then he goes into the wavelengths and then breath, and somehow it's all like flowing and connecting, and somehow this is going to lead us to the Merkaba meditation. So I guess what my question is right now is, what is the importance of the geometries? Because like we have temples, geometries, we have wavelength waveforms, and we have breath, but we focus a lot on the geometries, and I'm wondering if you can just give me a thought of what that is that I can think about in the next week, why the geometries are so important.
So the geometry is important because the universe is geometrical. The language of God is geometry. And geometry will manifest, or life will manifest itself in geometric forms. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense now, but as we go through those steps, and then we're going to start talking about the Fibonacci sequence, for example, and even the shapes we went through today, we're going to see that those forms and especially the phi number, the Fibonacci sequence, it's kind of the whole life is going to that direction. It's kind of, it's also part of the evolution, as for example, the center of the sunflower, as you look on the edge, the poles there are kind of spread out. It doesn't fit perfectly. And as you keep going to the center, the relation gets closer and closer to the Fibonacci number. So it's like the whole creation is going to that direction. What is that direction? It's God itself. So it's kind of two movements of uh, splitting itself from itself, so it can experience the creation from another perspective, which is separated, that is us. So three-dimensional beings, unaware, that we are connected and we are the all, we are the creator. So this whole exercise, of contracting and expanding, this is the fractal of the universe and how the universe manifests itself. And the language for this is geometry. Then this will combine and culminate in the Merkaba meditation, where we're gonna use those geometries to activate our light body and use this as a tool to connect ourselves to our divine source.
That was perfect. Yes, that was very helpful. So would you say that the sound and the geometries are just a different aspect of the same thing? Like,
yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, especially this chapter, Gadget, it is tough because he just dumped a ton of stuff, a ton of different stuff, and you keep thinking, man, how does all of that connect? Yeah,
Right.
it does connect. There's just a lot of missing points between the elements he threw in this chapter, but as we keep reading the book, he will unfold more of each concept separated, and it it requires a little patience. But by the end of the second book, it'll be like, oh, okay, now it makes sense,
Okay.
I promise. If you keep reading and you keep drawing, at some point it'll all merge together and will all make sense. And then the law of the correspondence, as within so above, will make the most sense, that you can take out of it. At least for me, that's how it worked. It was studying sacred geometry. That was how I could deeply understand that rule or that law.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts or insights before we finish, guys? Thought?
Thank you, Rapazella.
Yeah.
That's helpful to my mind.
Actually, Gachi gave me the idea. We were talking and he was like, man, this doesn't get in my mind. So, well, you know what? Maybe we need to
Myron, I would like to ask you a question.
Sure.
I would like to ask you about the fact that this book says in chapter 2 that we're a carbon-based form and we're soon to evolve into a silicon-based form with, instead of 46 chromosomes, we're going to have 48. Now, would you say something about that, please?
That's a tough one, Ed. I'm still trying to understand that one myself. There's another book, man. It was actually Dustin. He gave me a book. I forgot the name of the book. But there are other authors that talk about that moving from carbon to silicon base. I don't think it means, well,
It's Earth, the cosmos, and you.
yes, they also talk about that. And I don't think it's a literal ad. I think it's symbolic, but I still didn't get that one. Hopefully by the end of this study, I will have that answer. I don't have the answer now. Do you have any insights there?
I don't have any insights. I can't figure that one out, but I do know that computers are silicon based. Maybe we're going to turn into a computer.
I'll write that down and I'll keep digging at some
And
of
if you
those.
would post the name of that book in the chat, that'd be great.
Sure.
Okay.
That.
I have an idea. I don't know if it's an insight, but it's been hiding in a moldy corner of my brain related to what Eddie was asking. You know, if we talk a little bit about all of what we're trying to connect, you know, the geometry of things and the frequency of things, the vibration of things with frequency and vibration, the sound of things as well. And so then we talk a little bit about the chemical aspect of things. If we look at carbon and silicon as elements, what is the relationship between that transmutation or transcendence in terms of not necessarily what we're thinking of this chemical, physical transformation into that, but more so the vibratory, energetic transformation within ourselves as we think of that change, that transmutation as more of ascendance in terms of what we are as our own inner alchemists, as we transmute a lot of the things in our lives. Am I in some alchemical way? Am I in some more allegorical way elevating myself from atomically and chemically speaking from carbon to that other element, and then we go back to the relationship of protons, neutrons in that nucleus and the electrons around that, right? So that's also what I think in terms of ultimately, if we think about it, all elements are just expansions of the elements that came before it. Is just how many electrons we can hold around that nucleus that changes that. Is that how we're changing ourselves? Is that how we're ascending, if you will? Or that's kind of what I've been thinking about, Eddie. I don't know if that tracks in any kind of way whatsoever, but that's how I've been looking at that carbon and silicon connection. It's been eating at me for a while, trying to understand that too.
I think you're right, Pablo. It's about vibration, just like you said.
Put it down. I'll keep digging too. Thank you for the insight, Pablo. I think it's totally about that and not literal. We're 7 minutes past time here, guys, so I'm gonna close it. Thank you so much for joining tonight. It's always a pleasure to take this time with you all.
Namaste.
Great night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Mhm.